Hello, my name is Harry Kazianis. I'm the executive editor at the National Interest. Today we have a special treat all the way from Hawaii. We have David Santoro. David is a senior fellow at PacForum CSIS. He's been expert on Asian nuclear weapons, non-proliferation, disarmament. Real treat to have him here all the way from such a distance. David, it's a pleasure to see you once again. I'm glad you're here to join us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me here.
Excellent.
Happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So first question I'd like to ask is, I know you're a big reader of the National Interest, and we've had quite a bit of a debate talking about China, the US-China security dilemma, if I can use that term, nuclear weapons. But when we talk about nuclear weapons, it sometimes, I feel like that discussion seems to be like a US-Russia discussion in a lot of instances. And it seems like maybe just on the expert level or maybe the security studies level, there's a lot of talk about Chinese nuclear weapons, but maybe going into the mainstream media, you don't hear a lot about it. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit if we could. Maybe to start out, a good way to maybe frame the discussion would be to think maybe broadly about this US-China security dilemma. Do you see, as the years go by, we talk about A2AD, air-sea battle, these other things, but the nuclear component isn't really talked about a lot. Do you see, or do you have any fears that there could be a strong nuclear component to this dilemma? Why or why not?
Okay. Well, do I fear the nuclear component? Yes, I think it's from a US perspective, it's definitely a priority. Engaging China on nuclear issues, strategic nuclear dynamics, is definitely something that the US is trying to promote. The problem is, of course, discussions are limited. So there's a great deal of talks that is going on between the US and China, very little and no official dialogue at the nuclear level. So most of the discussions that have taken place are actually at the track 1.5 level, unofficial level. So we at the Pacific Forum CSIS have actually done a dialogue process. We've been doing that for a few years, engaging the Chinese on these strategic nuclear issues for a long time. Now, of course, it's not a substitute for official discussions, but there's, in the background, this dialogue process going on. So is it important? Yes, I think it's important that we gain traction on that front, essentially because, as you rightly said, the focus has been the US-Russia relations when it comes to nuclear issues, for good reasons, because these two actors still have actually the largest nuclear arsenals in the world. Now, China has been developing its conventional forces as well as its nuclear forces, and it's rising again. So we want to engage China as well. China has also chosen to be very much less transparent than other nuclear armed states, so it's important to engage them, to understand how they see their nuclear weapons, what they want to do with them, and how they doctrine from a doctrinal point of view, and so on. So it is a US priority. A lot has been achieved, despite what many people say. A lot has been achieved over the past, I would say, 10 years. But we're a long way to go to, again, having an official dialogue and B, developing an arms control partnership.
Excellent, excellent. No, those are good points. Let's change gears slightly, and I want to talk a little bit about sort of Chinese nuclear weapons as a whole. There's a lot of talk about a lot of just different things in the press that their arsenal's growing. There was a controversy a couple of years back that the Chinese are building tunnels everywhere, and I think a lot of that was sort of discredited. But in your view, give us a sense of sort of what the mission is of the Chinese nuclear arsenal. Is it deterrence? Is it defensive? Is it offensive? Give us your take on that.
So according to Mao, actually, when China first developed nuclear weapons in the 60s, it was essentially seen as a deterrent to smash nuclear bullying, according to Mao, if I got that quote right. Basically, it was to preserve, to insulate China and make sure that no one could actually attack China. So they see it as a deterrent. Now, obviously, once you have a nuclear arsenal, there's always a possibility that you actually end up using it in different ways. So my take is that no, they have a minimum deterrent posture. As you rightly said, like the discussions about China having many more nuclear weapons than we actually think have been widely discredited by the experts community. And my take is that they have a minimum deterrent posture, and we probably keep such a posture for the years to come. And what we hear from the experts is that they still aspire to maintain that force posture. And they're also sticking to a so-called no first use policy,
right,
which basically means that they don't want to be the first one to use nuclear weapons, and they only use them in response to a nuclear attack.
Okay, so let's move on to a different country when it comes to nuclear weapons, Japan. Now, there's been, every once in a while when I go to Asia and maybe tensions are ratcheted up either between China and Japan or maybe other parties, you hear every once in a while that Japan could maybe consider some sort of small nuclear deterrent. So I think the first question I have to put on the table, could they build nuclear weapons? And if they could, how long, in your expert view, would it take for them to actually make a deliverable nuclear weapon?
Could they build the nuclear weapons? Yes. They have nuclear material, they have nuclear expertise, they have a very advanced and sophisticated space program. Yes, they could build the nuclear weapons if they were willing to do so, and I guess we can talk about Japanese willingness to do so later on. But
right.
Yes, they could do it. The traditional, in terms of how quickly could they do it, to me this is still a big question mark, because people say, well, they're just a couple screwdrivers away from developing a bomb. No one has actually made a serious study about how long it would take for Japan to do that. So people talk about a few weeks, a few months, others talk about just a few days, but no one has actually studied that in depth. So I personally don't know. I think that they have the building blocks to do that relatively quickly. How long this hasn't been answered.
Fair enough. I won't press you anymore, but I will ask you this. So you spent a lot of time in Asia. You're based obviously in Honolulu. You're traveling all around the region, talking to people. I know you've spent at least a fair amount of time in Japan. Give us your sense of what type of event would it take for the Japanese to consider that? Would it take an incident in the Senkakus? Would it take some sort of, I don't know, even maybe relations with the Russians going downhill dramatically? Give us a sense of how far relations with their neighbors would have to go downhill before they go down that path.
We can obviously think about a lot of different scenarios for that to happen.
Sure.
It would have to be an extremely serious event for Japan to go nuclear. Japan is actually, throughout its history, since the end of the Second World War, modern Japan has considered developing nuclear weapons on a bunch of occasions, and has decided not to, for a whole lot of reasons. Within the Japanese population, there is still a very strong reluctance to go down that path for many reasons, and because of the nature of Japanese society. My own sense is right now the odds of Japan going nuclear are very, very low. A couple people here and there, a couple officials are mentioning that yes, this could actually happen, but they're just isolated comments, and I just don't see that as indicating that Japan could actually go down that route.
Okay, fair enough. So to maybe take that question a little bit broader, do you see any other nations in the Asia Pacific maybe considering that, maybe Taiwan, or I know South Korea, there was some debate years ago. Do you see any other countries maybe that might consider it down the road?
I mean, I think when it comes to developing nuclear weapons, South Korea is more likely to develop nuclear weapons than the Japanese. There's, I think, if I remember correctly, nearly 70% of public opinion that say that they are in favor of developing nuclear weapons, and you've had a few experts and people actually from at the elite level, making a case for the development of independent nuclear weapons in South Korea. Now, I think it's one thing to say that you know, advocating that option, and it's quite another to go through it, not only at the elite level, but also, you know, for the South Korean society, to realize that, okay, you're going to actually go down that path. This will be very hard to sustain politically. And I mean, am I worried? Yes, I'm more worried about South Korea going nuclear than I'm worried about Japan. But I still think that it would take a lot for the South Koreans to do that.
Excellent, fair enough. Looking ahead, I would say, to the U.S.-China, I guess you could say, nuclear relationship. In the beginning of your remarks, you talked a little bit about, you know, maybe strategic ambiguity and maybe the Chinese not wanting to discuss some of these issues. Do you see in the years ahead maybe the Chinese loosening up a little bit when it comes to nuclear issues, maybe moving beyond the track 2s and track 1.5 dialogues and having official discussions in any regards?
So, as part of our track 1.5 dialogue, these are issues that we have discussed. You know, we've tried to explain why it would make sense for the United States and China to actually talk at the official level on nuclear issues. This has been an aspiration, even within our unofficial dialogue. In recent years, however, the Chinese have been much more willing to show optimism about such a dialogue. In the context of Xi Jinping's concept about developing a so-called new type of major country relations, we have discussed this, saying, well, what does that mean? Is there a nuclear dimension to it? Could this be the beginning of opening a dialogue? And in the aftermath of the Sunnyland Summit, we had our latest dialogue at the track 1.5 dialogue, at the track 1.5 level, and many in the Chinese delegation said that they would encourage the Chinese government to take on the U.S. offer to establish a dialogue on those issues. Now, so far, we haven't seen that gaining any traction, but you know. So my sense is that possibly this could move towards that direction. The U.S. is certainly impatient for that to happen. From a U.S. perspective, again, it's about putting flesh on this new type concept and try and make sense of how to organize that relationship generally and at the nuclear level in particular.
Excellent. Well, David.